Egypt has a population of approximately 112 million, making it the third most populous country in Africa. However, only about 10% of its citizens are spread across 90% of the country's landmass. You might be wondering, where do the remaining 90% live? Join us as we explore why over 90 million people are concentrated in a small portion of this vast nation. Considered a cradle of civilization, Egypt has one of the longest histories of any country. Tracing its heritage back to the 6th to 4th millennia BCE, the empire has endured and thrived over time, but the reason for their development was revealed in the 5th century by a popular Greek historian, Herodotus. Back then, he noted that any sensible person could see that the ancient Egyptian land was given to them by the Nile River, which is why they keep thriving. This learned historian was actually true because 96% of Egypt's geographical area is desert, which simply means there is no forest to cultivate, pastures to feed animals, or even water to drink. Due to this extreme aridity, over 90% of the population concentrates on 6% of the vast land of Egypt. And it's because of one thing that Herodotus observed millennia ago: the Nile. The Nile, which is the longest river in the world, flows northward for 6,695 kilometers from East Central Africa to the Mediterranean, providing ancient Egypt with fertile soil and water for irrigation, as well as means of transporting materials for building projects. Its vital waters enabled cities to sprout in the middle of a desert. The modern name of the Nile River comes from the Greek Nilios, but the Egyptians called it Iteru. The Nile River system has three main branches: the White Nile, the Blue Nile, and the Atbara River. The White Nile, which is the river's headwaters, flows from Lake Victoria and Lake Albert. The Blue Nile is responsible for their annual flooding and contributes the majority of the river's water and nutrient-rich silt, while the Atbara River has a lesser influence on the Nile's flow. The Nile has a series of 6 main cataracts in the south, which began at the site of Aswan. These cataracts are shallow stretches of turbulent waters formed where flowing waters encounter rock layers. The Nile cataracts, marked by large granite outcrops, disrupt the river's flow, making navigation more unpredictable and challenging by boat. This natural cataract system formed a boundary at Aswan, marking the division between Egypt and its southern neighbor, Nubia, which is present-day Sudan. Even before the present-day government, the ancient Egyptians succeeded in zoning the country into 4: the Nile Valley, the Delta, the Western Desert, and the Eastern Desert, further classified as Lower and Upper Egypt today. These zones had their own natural environment and role back then, with the Nile Valley in the Delta being associated with life, goodness, and abundance. The ancient Egyptians attached these to those areas because they could only survive and flourish there with access to water, land, and other key resources. As for those zones tagged desert, they are known for death, chaos, and bad luck. While Herodotus' millennial-ago observations were limited to the areas in the north and in the delta, they really ring true for all the Nile River Valley. The Nile was important to every aspect of life in Egypt. It provided food, resources, fertile land for agriculture, and a crucial means of transportation, enabling the movement of materials for construction and other major projects. It was a critical lifeline that literally brought life to the desert and gave rise to one of the earliest civilizations. It is simply as saying, without this river, there would be no Egypt. Even most present-day Egyptians were descendants of settlers who moved to the Nile Valley in prehistoric times in search of survival, and population just increased with natural fertility. In various periods, there were immigrants from Libya and especially the Middle East. While in most countries, the south is considered to be the most fertile and with most water, that isn't the same for Egypt, mainly because the Nile River flows northward, so almost everyone lives in the north beside the Nile because it was the primary source of water for drinking and growing crops, while the rest of the countries are generally deserts, quite dry, sandy, and rocky. The vast floodplain of the Nile Delta and the narrow strip of fertile land along the Nile Valley shaped distinct lifestyles for the Egyptians. In the Delta, towns were built on natural elevations that became islands during the annual flooding. The Delta's strategic location along the Mediterranean and its proximity to the Levant made it a vital hub for trade and international relations. As a result, the Nile Delta was a culturally diverse region throughout Egypt's history, serving as a melting pot for various peoples and influences. Humans also have the opportunity to develop a settled agricultural economy and a more sophisticated, centralized society that became a cornerstone in the history of human civilization. The Nile was such a vital part of Egyptian life that the ancient calendar was based on its 3 cycles. These seasons, each lasting 4 months with 30 days each, were known as Akhet, Peret, and Shimu. Akhet, meaning inundation, marked the period when the Nile flooded, depositing layers of fertile soil essential for agriculture. Peret was the growing season, while Shimu, the final season, was the harvest period, characterized by dry conditions and no rain. According to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, ancient Egyptian farmers were among the first to practice large-scale agriculture in the spring of each year before civilization. The Nile would reliably flood and spread out as much as 1 mile wide. It would recede and leave fertile mud or soil behind. The farmers would then prepare the soil with a plow pulled by 2 men or 2 cattle. Next, they would go through the field with a mattock, a pickaxe-like tool, to break up the large clumps of soil. After the soil was prepared, women would scatter seed in the furrows by hand from wicker baskets. A herd of sheep would then walk over the field to bury the seed. The fields were irrigated after planting by using ditches and canals with water from the main river. To maximize the use of the Nile's waters, ancient Egyptians also perfected irrigation techniques known as basin irrigation to expand arable land, ensuring they could grow enough crops to sustain their growing population. This involved constructing networks of earthen banks to form basins and digging channels to direct floodwater into them. The water would remain in the basins for a month, allowing the soil to become saturated and ready for planting. Key crops such as beans, cotton, flax, and wheat were not only plentiful but could also be easily stored and traded. The Nile Delta was also ideal for cultivating papyrus, a versatile plant with numerous uses. While Egyptians made cloth, boxes, and rope from papyrus, its most significant contribution was in the creation of paper, which played a crucial role in recording their history and culture. The connection between the Egyptians and the Nile River comes so close, and this led them to identify a number of their gods with aspects of the river, its annual flood, and the fertility and abundance associated with them. For example, Hapi is the incarnation of the life force that the Nile provides. He also symbolizes the annual inundation of the Nile. His round belly and folds of skin represent abundance. Osiris, who is most often recognized in his role associated with the afterlife, is fundamentally a god of regeneration and rebirth. Artists often depicted him with black skin, linking him to the fertility of the Nile River and its life-giving silt. The broader natural world was a further source of inspiration for Egyptian religion. Much like in ancient times, modern-day Egyptians remain deeply connected to the Nile, though now in a different dimension. The river plays a pivotal role in the country's economy. Egypt boasts the second largest economy in Africa, yet it is undeniably concentrated in the lower Nile region. This area, where the Nile winds through fertile lands, is rich in natural resources. Agriculture, water resources, minerals, and energy reserves are abundant here, making it the economic heart of the country. By now, you'll understand why people have settled in this region since the ancient days, and over time, these ancient settlements have evolved into major urban centers like Cairo, Alexandria, Aswan, and Port Said. These cities have become hubs for rapidly developing industries such as technology, construction, automobile manufacturing, transportation, and tourism. As a result, Egypt's population density, particularly in the Nile Delta and Valley, is now among the highest in the world, with millions clustered in a relatively small portion of the country's vast landscape, and no one having the thought of leaving. Those centuries have passed, and we're now in the age of technology. The importance of the Nile River can't be underestimated, which is why most people prefer living in Nile Delta cities like Cairo and Alexandria, because they offer the needed opportunities. If you have a different perspective, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.